Ganbei,
Ganbei, Hato, how are you?
I am good. How are you?
Not too bad. Actually, I was talking with a friend this morning about they are going to hire a factory manager, and we were discussing some of the hoping for the best, preparing for the worst when you are hiring China. And as discussed, I think Hasta, vista, baby is the topic for today. So basically, when the employer and the employee go their separate ways, I am a little bit over pessimistic with some of the things I say about that, because you have one or two bad experiences, and it tends to sort of cloud your judgment when it comes to this type of thing. I've had one or two cases. In fact, one case, I think that the employee was mentally unstable. I mean, it was really quite difficult, and the process when you are terminating employment, you have various stages from very easy. They come in and they discuss and they say that they have a new job, or that for whatever reason they're going to leave. You discuss handover, and all that goes through smoothly, and you find a new person, and the old person hands over the work and the contacts and the position, and then you continue on with relatively little disruption. And then you go to the other end. I mean, probably I've also heard much worse stories, but in my own experience, one of the worst cases I had was when the person they were asking for 10 times what they were getting at the current time. And basically they were quite a good performer. They had very, very bad social skills. It was very difficult for them to talk to anyone else in the company. So with this particular person, I was their link with everyone else in the company. So this person was in finance. If they needed every month they needed production figures, they needed inventory figures, they could not go to anyone else in the company. They had completely destroyed their working relationship with everyone else in the company, and they would have to go through me, who was the general manager at the time, to get the figures from anyone. So that was extremely trying, and it was definitely it should have been more of a warning for me that something was bound to happen with her sooner or later. But on the other hand, she was a very, very good financial manager, and she did excellent financial modeling, very, very accurate financial modeling for cash flow and for profit. That was really good. And she, in the past, she had worked for Pepsi, Coca-Cola, one of those organizations, and she had been trained really well in financial modeling. So it was in that way it was a really good skill to have, and as a manager you always want to have good financial knowledge and premonition coming from your finance office. So from that point of view it was excellent. But on the negative side, she was unable to work with anyone else. Even if the same people in her department were basically scared of her, then they wouldn't say anything while she was in the office. So anyway, she came into my office one day and she said that she was unhappy with the work. She'd quit a few times before, but I'd felt that it was more like that she'd been very tired. Maybe there was several days that she'd been working really long nights to get all the information that she needed to give to me. And she'd quit a few times in the past, but this time she came and she said, because she also knew all our wages, and she said, I want this particular wage. And it was at least 10 times what she was getting at the moment. So I said, look, let me think about it, but your resignation, but this wage level, it's not going to happen. And then she became quite unstable for the next couple of days, and it was quite clear that she would have to go. Mm-hmm. And I told the chairman, I said that she has given her resignation in again, but now she's also given requests, for really unbelievable wage increases. So I think the time is, to let her go. So we found a new person. While the two financial managers were there, both of them told me that the handover had been done. But after the old financial manager left, the new person said that the transfer, the handover had been done very badly. But she hadn't wanted to say, she just basically wanted the old financial manager out, which I could completely understand, because there was no way for her to work in that type of environment. So then, and this is sort of the point that I want to talk about. The old financial manager took it to court.
Really?
And yes, in China they have something called labor arbitration. It's not a court. It's run under the auspices of the Labor Bureau, and it's an organization that hears all problems between staff and the companies. It's very easy to make a case with them. They, anyone can go up and say, I was fired, or I'm unhappy, with my situation. And the thing is that this application can be given up to 2 years of the person leaving the company.
Okay.
So this is something that you have to think about. If you have a person that has left in a not very happy way, you can have up to 2 years with nothing, and then the arbitration notice can come. So if you are suspecting that it might turn legal, you should definitely make sure that your documents are all kept, and that if you have any changeover in the company, that the current person who is dealing with HR is aware of everything that happened in those, before that person left. Because, 2 years, so maybe you had a human resources manager that started 6 months after that person left, and maybe they don't know all the details. But then, a year and a half after the HR manager starts, then you have a court case. Mm-hmm. So it's quite, of course, and this again, I'm saying maybe I'm being over pessimistic, but if the hiring manager has a feeling that it might go legal, you should definitely have all your documentation kept, and the HR manager and the people who are related to the person that had left, related in the work relations, they should be, at the back of their minds, not actively saying that they need to prepare a case, but they should at least be aware of what happened. And your HR manager must have all the documentation that would be needed in court to present to the court if a claim is made.
Mm. Is there a document or contract that can be signed at the when they part ways? In no case they will sue you after 2 years or at any moment within those 2 years.
No, but normally what you do is, just as a standard hiring and firing procedure, that your HR manager will check, for example, with the finance department, with the other different departments, did this person have anything, for example, did they have any cash flow loans, for example, from the company? Did they owe the company any money? And this sort of thing should be documented, and it should be said that everything is clear. For example, if they had a company car, has it been returned? Did they have, keys? Did they have an access card to the company? All of this should be, written down and said that it was returned, yes or no. Are there any problems, yes or no? And everything is just documented. And then both the HR manager, the direct manager, and the person sign. And then finally, the general manager should sign. Mm-hmm. And you should have that. But in the particular case that I'm talking about, we had a problem, and it was also, you could say it was also due to my inexperience, but this person was quite malicious, and what they had done is that they were also making the wage, the payroll documents for each month, and they had deliberately made a larger overtime number for the amount of overtime work that they had done. Mm-hmm. But they had not been paid out on that amount. And so what happens is that the HR manager signed that they had made this form, and then they gave it to me, the general manager, to sign off to say the form was correct. But, if you have a lot of people in the company, it's not so easy to see all the particular details, and you really rely on your manager to make sure that it's done properly. But they had actually expanded their amount of overtime, not to a crazy amount, but each month they had extra overtime there that they were not being paid for. And then what happened what happened when they took it to court, they said that they had overtime that they were not being paid for. And in China, your wage must be paid by the company, and if you don't pay the staff wage on time, then the government will if you go to a legal court, they will say there's no negotiation about wage. The wage must be paid, and if you don't pay it on time, there is also a late payment that needs to be made. And so overtime is also seen as wage. So this one was a very difficult very difficult point to fight in court. The other thing that they had asked for was a very large bonus, and they had left before the bonus was complete, before the time, because normally bonuses are paid out in China at a certain time, Chinese New Year or whenever the company agrees. Mm-hmm. And if the person leaves before that time, they don't get the bonus. So she had asked for the bonus. She had asked for the overtime pay, which was really quite a large amount. And she'd also asked for, she had I can't remember even the third thing that she asked for. It was, suffrage or mental suffering fee, okay, or something stupid like that. So in the end, in the Labour Arbitration Bureau, they did not agree with her. And they said that some of the overtime, I think they said the overtime should be paid, but the other 2 points should not be paid. Okay. So normally in all the other cases that I've dealt with when it's gone to arbitration, the arbitration, not all the cases, in most of the cases, the arbitration in the Labour arbitration is where it finishes. And then the staff member and the company will say, okay, this is the deal. We will pay the money, but you always have an agreement that accepting this money means that you agree with the decision of the court and you will not seek an appeal. Mm-hmm. But this person was not happy with the Labour arbitration, so they took it to the court system. And then the court system you have the local court, then you have a middle court, and then the Supreme Court is in Beijing. So it's basically we did the local court. We had the same answer. We had the same answer or the same result as the Labour arbitration, and they were not happy with that, and they took it to the middle court, which is, normally middle court is for really quite serious things. Mm-hmm. So I think that as it got higher and higher, the judges and people who were involved realized that she was just, she really had a mental issue. And so in the end, they stopped it. We paid her some money, and she was not allowed to take it, any further. But she would have liked to take it as far as she could. I mean, for an issue like this, it's very, very rare that it goes higher than a local court. Mm-hmm. We had a situation where we had 5 older workers. They were like, I think the oldest guy was almost 70, and he had the 5 people were between 65 and 70. We had hired them not as regular workers, but long-term temporary workers. And the major difference with a temporary worker is that you do not have to pay their social insurance. Mm-hmm. But you also have the risk that if they fall over dead from old age, in the company, you'll also have a lot of, very angry family members there asking for compensation. So we had decided that because their age was getting up there, like I said, the oldest guy was, 69, almost 70, that we thought it was better that we stopped these workers, and we found some younger people to replace them, people who were 60. So anyway, we explained to them that because we could not buy social insurance for them because they were over age, that we had decided to stop their employment. We gave them notice. We also gave them a gift to thank them for their work, and they seemed quite happy, when they left the company. But one of them had found a lawyer who had told them that they would work for free and that they would be able to get a lot of money out of the company because we were, a foreign company, and they thought that they would be able to get money out of us. So we went to the Labour Bureau, and they went to the Labour Bureau, and the Labour Bureau called us and said, you have 5 ex-workers here. They're very angry that they were fired, and they want to have compensation. And we had already discussed with the Labour Bureau, and they had told us that what we were doing was within the law, and that we had no legal liabilities to them. So when they came to the Labour Bureau, they at first told them that they had no legal rights, that we had done everything according to the law. But because they kept coming, the Labour Bureau was also unable to deal with them anymore. So then they went to labour arbitration. And in labour arbitration, they also lost. But they were still not happy, and then they went to court. And then in court, they also lost. But the problem is that if you're not, I wouldn't say used to, because no one's ever used to, going to court. But if you're not able to see that this is something that happens fairly regularly, and I think in China it will happen more and more regularly, that employees, when they leave the company, will sue you. It really takes a lot of time and worry, and it sort of distracts you from the main thing that you should be doing, which is trying to make some money for your company. So I think maybe what's interesting is to talk about what to expect if you are taken to court, what sort of documentation, how the process will run, just so that people are not completely, surprised, when it happens. Yeah. So in China, regardless of what people think or what you read in the newspaper, at the basic level of Chinese law, it is an extremely reliable, honest, and technical institution. For labour disputes or things like that, they don't have witnesses. It's all on documents. And the documents that you can present are strictly controlled. And what normally will happen is, so for example, you have an employee that you have terminated, and they're unhappy with the termination, and they want more compensation than you have given them. So you will get a call from the Labour Bureau saying, you're an ex-employee, he's unhappy, he's complaining, can you do anything more to help him, to stop the situation? And then you have to think a little bit, is it worth to pay some money now and just stop the whole thing? Or is it, do you feel confident enough, or you are confident enough that you can defend yourself in court and just proceed, just not to worry about him complaining to the Labour Bureau? So if you decide not to give him anything more, then you know that sooner or later you'll have a courier from the labour arbitration. It will be addressed to the legal representative, the legal representative of the company, who is I don't know if you've noticed, but in China all companies have a legal representative, and that is the person that is legally responsible for the company. So if your company is taken to court for whatever reason, the legal representative would be the one that is contacted.
And is it usually general director?
Yes, normally it is the chairman of the board, or if it is a single investor, like a family investor, then it is the main investor. Mm-hmm. But when the company is formed, you have to say who is your legal rep, and that will be on the business license. So you'll have a courier document come to your company addressed to the legal rep, saying from the legal arbitration, from the labour arbitration, or from the court, or from wherever, dear legal representative, your company has been is now a party in a legal dispute, and then you'll have some information, what the issue is, what the person is asking for, and you will have a date for your day in court. You can, at this time, you can immediately go back to the court and you can say that you agree with all their terms and everything that they ask for, and then you can settle straight away. But normally what's happened is that the labour arbitration has called your company and asked you this question, and if you've decided not to give what the person wants, then it will go to this stage where they make a formal application to the court, and then everything goes legal, and then it goes to and then you'll get the formal court summons with their request. And then you are sometimes what happens is that they will ask you to make a reply in writing before the court. Sometimes you have to present, or your lawyer has to present your reply in the court. But anyway, the first thing that happens when you get this piece of paper is that you should have seen this coming, and you should have a lawyer ready. And the reason why you should see it coming is that the Labour Bureau would have called you to say that this person is unhappy and wants to have this and that. And if you have told the Labour Bureau that you are not going to reply, or you're not going to give them what they want, then the next step will be this court summons. And at that time, you should then, if you haven't got a lawyer, you should then find your lawyer. If you have a lawyer already that's doing your labour issues for you, you should just give them a call and let them know the situation so that they will be ready when the court summons comes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And with the labour arbitration issue, the legal representative does not need to attend the court. So they will need to give their formal authorization for you as the general manager to organize, and then you will organize the lawyer, and then the lawyer is the only one who appears in the court. I've appeared in court once or twice, and after that I felt that it was better for me not to be in court, because
for what reason?
Well, the main reason is that if someone asks a question and you are not sure of the answer, you have to give an answer. And if you're not there, then your lawyer will say, because the general manager is the only one who would know this answer, we have to contact him after the court, and it just buys you a little bit more time.
Okay, it's not because you got so upset and couldn't control your emotions.
No, I was okay, but one of our Chinese colleagues was extremely angry, and I really had to hold him down. He was very, very angry that our previous colleague had just been so crazy in what they asked. But I think that in the Chinese legal system, it's extremely technical. So documents are given. So you know what they're asking for. You prepare documents, for example, their labor contract or whatever other documents that they're saying why they want this amount of money. You prepare those documents, and then what happens is that the other side's lawyer will check the documents, and if they think that document is not in their favor, they will try to find a legal reason for that document not to be included. And this is also happening. This is also how it works for your own lawyer. And for example, they will say if there is a communication from the company, unless it meets certain requirements of which I'm also at the moment, I'm not exactly sure what they are, they can say that this is not admissible in court. So, for example, if you had a labour contract, but the labour contract was not stamped and signed by both parties, then you could say that this is not a real labour contract and cannot be accepted in court. So it's a lot of these very technical issues, and for that, you just need the lawyer to be involved.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But the other thing is that the lawyer needs to know the full story about what has happened with the person, to lead up to this case. So you also have to spend quite a lot of time explaining to the lawyer and trying to give as much documentation as you can to help the lawyer, represent you in the best possible way.
Yeah. How about the reasons for firing? They say that in Finland it's easier to shut down the whole plant and fire everybody and move it to South America or China than it is to fire one person. How is it in China, and what are the good reasons for firing, and is it difficult?
Well, basically, if you want to fire someone in China, it's just a matter of paying the compensation. And as long as the compensation has been paid, no court can request that this person's job be given back. So, and the compensation is, okay, you decide that you're going to fire someone. You can either fire them immediately or you give them a month's notice. So if you fire them immediately, then you have to give them 1 month's salary compensation for not giving them 1 month's notice. Then, for every calendar year that they have worked, you need to pay them 1 month's salary. So if they've worked for 1 year and you want them to leave immediately, you'll have to give them 2 months' salary.
Mm-hmm.
If they've worked for a year but you give them a month's notice, then you need to pay them 1 month's salary. So as long as you pay the compensation, then even if they go to arbitration, then the arbitration committee can only require that you give the proper compensation. So in that way, it's quite it's a better system than in Europe or Australia, because you don't have to prove anything. You just need to give compensation. If you are trying to fire people without compensation, then technically it can be done, but it is extremely difficult. And once they go to labour arbitration, in most cases, the arbitration bureau will ask the company to pay this compensation anyway, because, the labor law and the arbitration bureau, their sort of main function is to help workers, help the employees. So even if the person is really hopeless or, they can't do their job, if you want to fire them without compensation, you need to give them training. You need to have proof that you've given them training. So, for example, there's one worker that can't do his job. So you have to call him in and have a discussion with him and have a written document that he signs to say that he cannot do his job, but you're willing to give training. So he does the training, that's all documented. He still can't do the job. And then you need to be able to show that you cannot find another position in the company for him. And if you can't do all this, then you can let him go without compensation. But most likely he'll go to the Labour Bureau, go to the arbitration, and they will require that you pay, a month for every calendar year that he has worked. So I always tell people that when they are hiring people, they should consider that if the person needs to be made redundant, then they will be paying compensation.
Is there anything else that should be taken into account while hiring that makes firing easier? Although that's of course never a goal.
Well, I think there's also another thing with the contract that maybe I just add another point here. If you are firing workers, there is a percentage. Once you start firing more than a certain percentage of your labour force, you need to get permission from the local government before you let them go. And so if it's only one or two people, of course, it's not an issue. But if you start firing, 10% or 20%, before you do this, you need to talk to the Labour Bureau. And they may say, okay, 10%, 20%, it's okay. Because normally you're firing people because the market is not going well, you're not making money, you need to downsize your labour force. If you plan to let too many people go at one time, the Labour Bureau will not give you permission to let those people go. And instead, you'll have to make a plan with them about how you're going to retrench those people. And compensation will have to be given, but also you will have to do it, in steps. You won't be able to, if it's a large percentage of the workforce that you want to let go, you won't be able to let them go all at one time.
What is the size of the company, or how many employees you need to have before this becomes an issue?
Normally they talk about percentages. From the top of my head, I can't think of the percentages. But if you had, for example, if you had 100 workers, if you started to fire more than 20% of the workers at any one time, it would definitely be in your interest to go to the Labour Bureau and have a discussion with them first.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. But I assume if you have 5 people, for firing one person, it's immediately 20%.
Yeah, then I think that this is not a big issue.
Yeah.
But it's always good. It's always good to have a good relationship with your local Labour Bureau, and just to let them know what you're doing before you do it, especially when it comes to terminating people. Because if you let people know in the Labour Bureau why you have let this person go, when they come to complain, they'll be told, but yeah, your company told us that you were lazy and sleeping on the job, and so that's why you let go. And then sometimes that ends it. And so I think that's important, that you have a good communication with the Labour Bureau.
Mm-hmm. How about the actual situation of letting people go? I remember the scene from Jerry Maguire where when they fired Tom Cruise's character, and they made it in a coffee shop or a restaurant, and the reason was that there would be no scene, or he would not, go mad and rage and throw stuff because it was a public situation. Is there a similar risk in China that people would, lose control of themselves and get really upset?
Quite often people will get very upset. And the thing that you need to do is, and this is sort of also, you're asking before about when making a contract with people, what can you do to sort of, minimize the effect of, if you need to terminate them. And one thing that we did is, especially for workers' contracts, we said that if they make a scene or cause disruption to the company, then we reserve the right to fire them without any compensation. And just the idea was that we would try to get people, to know that if they cause a lot of problems for the company, we would fight, to fire them without compensation. In reality, it's not so easy, but at least you want to try and show the workers that if they are unreasonable, then it will have impacts on them.
How do you usually do it? You invite people to your office and then just break the news, or? I mean,
there are different. Of course, there's many different situations, but normally what happens is, or normally what should happen is that the direct hiring manager, when they find a problem with a certain person, and it could be just they think that the person's being a bit slack or whatever, that they call them into the office and they have a detailed conversation. HR manager is also involved if it's more senior, if it's more serious, and a written warning is given to them that they have to sign. And then you have a first warning that you have discussed with this person, that exactly what the problem is and what you expect them to change. You should have some quantitative points that you want them to improve and dates for them to improve by. So this is the first step. If sometimes what happens, especially with workers, that maybe they're a little bit lazy and they're not working, then their direct manager should call them in, have a conversation, say, listen, we've seen you, for example, you're sleeping on the job. This is not tolerated. You should also have in your handbook that it says you're not allowed to sleep on the job, because if you don't have that, then it's very difficult to say sleeping on the job is not good. So some things you would expect to be simple, but you need to have it in the handbook. So you have discussed with the person, they're doing these things that you don't want them to do or not good. You give them a written warning. You ask them to improve. Then if they don't improve, you call them into the office if you decided to fire them. And you, with the firing manager, with the HR manager, maybe with a more senior manager if it's needed, you have to discuss it. It's best to try and do it, or it's best to do it in private, because probably they will be very upset. And explain to them, that the situation has been made, that they have been terminated, that this is the compensation that they will be getting, if any, and you, at the same time, you take their keys, you take their access rights away from the company, and you escort them off the property. So this things need to be managed in a little bit beforehand. Quite often, though, with workers, just like with blue collar workers, that they have already just decided that they want to leave the company, and so that their motivation goes down, and they stay, for as long as they want. But then sooner or later, you have to let them go because they're not working hard. But this type of worker, normally, if they've already made the decision that they want to leave, they're normally quite easy about going. Mm-hmm. It's no big problems, and they that they also don't want to cause big problems. The bigger problems that I've seen is when you have white collar workers, especially if they're quite clever, they know the labor law very well, and they can really make it difficult for you if they feel that they have been wronged. And quite often people feel that they have been wronged. Maybe people think that they have made a very large contribution to the company. They don't think it's been rewarded, and then they will use their knowledge of the labor law and their intelligence, basically to try and get as much money out of the company as they can. And these are the types of people that you have to be a little bit more careful with. So one thing that I would always recommend is that, a direct manager knows exactly what the people that they are working for, that are working for them, exactly what they do on a day-to-day basis. He should be able to do all the things that the people underneath him are doing. For example, in finance, you have your tax reports. So, of course, they will know. I mean, the general manager, I always knew in theory what, each of my departments were doing. But for a lot of the very technical work, I didn't know exactly, for example, how to register a vehicle, or, I didn't know how to make a tax report. But the financial manager must be able to do this. And so then if they lose an accountant, that they can take over that work, because in China, a lot of tax accounting needs to be done each month. Mm-hmm. And if you miss a date, then it's very serious with the tax office. You start talking about fines and late fines and penalties. So as a precaution, the manager, even though if they're not normally doing that particular work, they should be able to know exactly how to do it if need be. Mm-hmm. The other thing is for salespeople that senior managers in the company should know all the major customers, and even though they might not deal with them very often, but they should tag along with the sales guys enough that if a sales guy leaves, he still has the senior manager still has the relationship with that customer, that he can call him and say, so-and-so has left the company, I'll be taking over before a new person coming, or we have a replacement person and I'm going to introduce them to you. But as long as you can do that, then there is no problem with the customers wondering, who to talk to in the company, what's happening. And that's very important in China.
Mm-hmm. How about the aspect of face? Is it, is there a way to manage it? Is there a way to fire somebody so that they retain face?
Well, I think that the important thing is that you have these discussions. Some people don't have discussions. They just give a piece of paper to the staff member, and the piece of paper says, you have made this and this and this mistake and you are fired, get out of the office. I think this is not really the way to do it. You should sit down face to face with the person, discuss firmly but politely, and then have them escorted off the premises, or come to a happy conclusion about when they will leave.
Mm-hmm. I heard a story that in America there is sometimes a custom that the way you the way you find out that you have been fired is that you go to lunch and then come back and your access card doesn't work anymore. You cannot get into the building.
This is very common also in American companies in China.
Okay.
So sometimes what they would do, I also had a friend who was fired like that. He was called to the boss's office, and the boss let him know that he had been terminated, and that there was this termination agreement with this amount of compensation. He was asked to give his company car keys. He gave his company car keys, and he said, please collect your personal objects from the personal effects from the office and leave. So he went to his office and he tried to get onto his computer, and he'd been locked out. Mm-hmm. So he found that quite a nasty way. And then he didn't have a way to go home. He had to call a taxi, to get home. So but that is how it's done in American companies quite often. And I agree that it is very good that you reduce the risk of the employee being able to damage your company or your reputation. But I think at the same time, if you are too, just my personal opinion, if you are too hard on it, then without giving them the respect of a face-to-face conversation behind closed doors, I think then that you're probably going to get yourself, at least a bad reputation, a bad hiring reputation in the area where you're working. So I always recommend that you sit face to face, you let the person know that they're being terminated, there's nothing that they can do about that, and try to end it in a reasonable way.
Yeah.
But if the person doesn't agree, then the person doesn't agree. They need to be taken out of the office. And the other thing is that you don't want a scene in the office. You don't want other people to see an angry employee, because that's also not good for morale. But the other thing is that, sometimes you like I said, you can give a person 1 month's notice and then they'll leave after 1 month, and you can save 1 month compensation that way. But if the person is not happy, negative, angry at the company, then they will be doing more damage in that 1 month than is worth, than is worth saving that 1 month's salary. So I would say if you have to let someone go, it's in most cases it's best that you cough up the money, you ask them to leave immediately, and give them that month's salary, that extra month's salary plus a month for every calendar year worked, and just ask them to leave the company immediately.
Yeah, I would think from risk perspective, 1 month's salary is quite little as opposed to damage that mid to higher level employee could do.
Yeah, and even they don't even have to be that mid-level, mid to low level. If they're for 1 month, constantly saying bad things about the company, that's also not good, because it affects morale, and then you'll have to improve that morale at a later time, which is also another cost.
Yeah. Throw a banquet to the whole company. It costs 10 times more.
Yeah, well, it's more like that. You have a lot of conversations with people, and you have to explain why that person, the real reason why they left, and things like that. It takes a lot of time. Another thing is that it's very common in companies that you send an email around the organization to say this person has joined, this is their job, a little bit about their personal backgrounds, and who they will be reporting to, and who reports to them, and their phone number and email. But also important is that the HR department sends a leaving email. And,
yes.
and the leaving email says this person is leaving for personal reasons. I mean, if they've really been fired, then you should say this person's been terminated. But normally you say this person's leaving for personal reasons. As of today at 5 p.m., they no longer work for the company, because it's quite often, that in some organizations people leave or are fired and no one knows. Yep. And so they're saying, "Oh, have you seen Arthur? He didn't come for coffee today. Oh, I don't know. Maybe he's sick today." And 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, Arthur's still not here. And then you go and ask the boss, "Where's Arthur?" "Oh, yeah, we had to let him go." So there's two reasons for doing that. I think the one is, so that the people in the company know what's happening. They know that the person has left. The other thing is that there is also a risk that especially if it's a large organization, that the person who has been fired, he might call and say, "Oh, hi, it's Arthur. I'd like to borrow the company car." "Oh, yeah, come and get the company car. But it's a bit of a rush, and I don't have the proper paperwork filled in by my boss." "Oh, it doesn't matter. Just take it." And and then things are gone.
Yeah. Any other big differences that you have noticed that are different from the West?
One thing that I see is that Chinese staff, even if they're really good, and you have a very good relationship with them, professional and personal, often when they decide to leave the company, they'll just come and say, "Oh, I'm leaving." And you'll be surprised because he's well paid, and you give him a lot of positive feedback about his work, and he seems to be happy. So you're surprised that he's leaving. That's the first thing. And then you say, leaving? Oh, but when are you leaving? Oh, I have a new job tomorrow, so today is my last day. And could be a very senior person, very a lot of responsibilities, but when they've decided in their mind that they're leaving, often they don't discuss with their direct manager or their colleagues. They make their mind up. They have another offer, and they just come and they say, I'm leaving today. There is nothing that can make them come to work if a person doesn't want to come to work. Unlike, for a company, if you don't pay someone who has worked, that is, strictly illegal, and the courts will make sure that the company pays with a penalty if you don't pay someone. But if an employee decides that they're not coming, there's nothing really you can do. So this is. I've had a situation where there's been a personal conflict in the company. There was a guy and girl, and they became boyfriend and girlfriend, and then they broke up, and both sides were very unhappy, and then they started not to work well and taking a lot of leave. But there was the girl, for example, didn't come to work for a week. She always called in sick. And I called her. I said, listen, you may want to quit the company, but you need to come in and do your handover. You need to come and do your termination process. You need to do a handover. But if they don't want to come in, it's very difficult to get them to come in. So this is something that I found interesting or found different. And in some ways, I find that this emotional intelligence is relatively low in a lot of people, and they find it difficult because maybe it's also they feel a lack of trust in themselves, that if they come and tell their boss that they are, for example, unhappy, looking for a new job because they don't feel that there is any development for them in this position, they won't tell you that. They'll just look for a new job. And then once everything is ready and the new job has been set and they've signed the offer letter, then they will come to you and they will say, I'm leaving. Bye-bye. And then you have a discussion, what's the problem? And they'll say, I found my position was a little bit boring, not much challenge. And then, of course, if people say like that, it could have been that you thought that the person was much better, but you didn't realize yourself, that they were so bored that they were thinking about leaving. So if they just come to you and said, I would like a job with more responsibility, obviously with more money, then you can start working on it. But if the people don't discuss with you, then you never know. And that's also an issue with the managers, that the managers have to be a little bit proactive with all their key people, especially to have regular conversations and to try and get a gauge about how that person is feeling. Because often the first warning that you'll get that the person wants to leave is when they hand in their termination notice. And that is something that I think is probably a little bit different to the West.
So the employees don't play against the old company versus new company. They just decide that, fuck it, I'm leaving.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes if they're in a very key position, the old company may offer more money. And sometimes what happens, especially if the two companies are in a very close area, the new boss will even call to the old boss and say, your guy, has applied for the position in my company. I think he's good. I'm going to hire him. But because we're in the same area, I want to let you know so that to give you an option to discuss with your staff, about a higher wage or, to keep him. And then if you want to keep him. And then at that time, call him in and say, listen, I've heard that you're applying for a job in this other company. I'd really like to keep you. And I can offer you, more responsibility with some more money. Would that be enough to keep you? Otherwise, on the other hand, you can also say, oh, I don't care, just take the guy. And then, then it's
he sucks
gone.
Anyway.
Yes, they take him. Oh, he's really a shitty worker, so thank you very much. But there's also, often in China, you have a lot of companies that, for example, maybe you had an investment wave from one particular country. So maybe in one industrial zone, you have 7 or 8 companies that are all the investment is coming from one country. So people know each other. They share information. They support each other by not poaching other people's employees. Maybe they have an agreement that they will not hire people from that company unless that person has already quit. We used to have an arrangement with the companies in our in our zone that if if we had people that had left, and it was normally workers who had left, without giving notice, or they had not performed well, and we'd put them on a blacklist, that we would share that blacklist, with the other companies, so that if someone came and they're on a blacklist, at least you were aware that had problems and what the problems were with the other company. So we that's sort of one way to try to make sure that you're if you do have a problem, that you can at least warn other employees, if you know them, about this particular person.
Do employees know about these blacklists, or is it usually like a secret?
Well, we will tell them they're on a blacklist, but they won't know what the blacklist. They won't know who is on the blacklist. But we will tell them that if you don't come to work, and you just go away without letting people know that you're resigning, then we will put you on a blacklist. And in fact, while I'm thinking about that, in China, the employer has a legal responsibility for his employees. So in one company that I was working in, before I was working there was one worker who disappeared. Okay. And he was later caught by the police for bank robbery. And
sorry, I could not come in. I had to rob a bank.
Sorry, I was busy that week. But the police came, and it was before my time, so I wasn't involved. But the police came and they said, what are you doing? You're not controlling your guy, blah blah blah. You let him, go do illegal things. And so you really have to prove to the police that you have done everything you can to try and find the guy, and that you are a responsible work unit. So it's that's why in a lot of company handbooks, you'll have the regulation that if you don't come to work for 3 days without informing the company, then you are automatically terminated.
Oh, really?
Because otherwise, if you don't do that, you have a legal responsibility to some extent for the actions of that person.
That's funny.
So, but another thing that just sort of a trick, that you can do is, if you're starting to have problems with a person and they are maybe not coming to work now, or they're being difficult, the last thing that you have is that the social insurance file, and that is basically all the money that they have paid for the that they and the company have paid for their pension, for their medical insurance, for the maternity insurance. They don't have access to this money, but they need to transfer this account to their new employer. And the only way that they can transfer that account to the new employer is if the old employer stamps it, approves it, that it can be moved.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes what happens, if you have a person that has been highly uncooperative, not coming to work, not handing over the job, you just remind them that you need them to come into work for the last, whatever amount of time you have agreed, and to hand their job over. And once that is done, then and only then you will stamp their leaving termination documents, which allows them to move their social insurance accounts away from your company.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And so this especially if they have a new job, this is a big issue, because according to the labor law, the company needs to pay the social insurance for each person. So the company will always be saying, look, listen, give us the documentation from your old company so that we can put your file, onto our records. And if they can't do that, then the new company also has a legal risk. If the Labour Bureau finds out that they've been employing people without paying the social insurance, the Labour Bureau will fine the company. So they will say, you need to get this documents done from your old company. And if they can't do it, then questions start to be raised. Why won't your old company release you? So that's also a tool that the company has to get the employee to give their final handover and to finish their final work.
Can the old company keep this from happening out of spite?
They can, but then you can go to the Labour Bureau, the Labour arbitration, and require that it be transferred to the new company.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are in that situation and the person is withholding information or not doing their job, you can also then say, good, I would also like to go to discuss this with the labour arbitration, because, you agreed that you would work for another month and you haven't done that.
Mm-hmm.
So in that case, and I've never been to a case like that, an arbitration case like that, but if they threaten like that, then you say, that's good, because actually I would also like to discuss how you haven't lived up to your side of the bargain.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay.
But I think in general, and just to wrap things up, that with all the positions, you need to have someone, another person who knows exactly what that person does and how they do it, so that if a person just decides to quit and leave and not do a handover,
mm-hmm.
that your critical functions are not impaired. And some companies have quite complicated, Excel with, first backup, second backup. It depends on the size of your company. But even as a small company, for your critical functions, which are HR, finance, and your relationship with customers and with important suppliers, you should have more than one person able to take over those positions. Well, you should have, what I mean is you should have at least two people that normally deal or that know all the key people, and that for each person who does a particular job, you should have at least one backup that can take up those jobs if need be, if the person just decides not to come in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, sounds like a good precaution.
And the other thing is, I've also, from my personal experience, sometimes you have people that are very clever. They're very good at doing some parts of their job, but other parts of their job they're really horrible at doing. And you need to make a decision about whether you will put up with a person who has excellent abilities in some things and really bad functions in other things, whether or not you want to put up with that. The other thing is that if you have a person like that, or anyone who comes into your office and asks to leave, I know that there are different ideas of thinking. Some people will try and keep that person on for as long as possible. Other people, as soon as someone comes into the office and says that they want to leave, they'll have a detailed discussion with them. And if it's at the end of the discussion, the person really does want to leave, that they've thought about it, that the manager will say, okay, I agree. Let's organize the handover, and then you can leave in whatever time. And it seems different managers that probably have extreme thinkings either way. Some people will do anything to keep people on. Some people, will let anyone go immediately. It's that's a little bit, I think, of a personal preference. But my advice is that if you are feeling, if you're feeling that you are being held to ransom over someone, someone is holding you to ransom by saying that they want to resign, then if you have a serious talk with them and they really have made their mind up, it's not just, that they're angry about a certain issue and they're saying they want to quit, but they really thought about it, they want to quit, then you should in that same meeting say, okay, I agree. Let's now sit down and make your handover planning. You work out a reasonable amount of time that they stay in the company, and you have everything fixed. It's best if you have it written down. Maybe you ask your HR manager to come to be a witness, and you settle everything like that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. So talk it out.
Talk it out, and then let them go.
Yeah. Okay. I think this is pretty good summary of.
But I think from the point of view of legal arbitration for labour,
yeah,
everybody can expect this to happen to them. It's becoming more. Excuse me. It's becoming more common that people take it to legal arbitration, mainly for a few reasons. One is that people are more aware of their legal rights. Mm-hmm. Two is that there are a lot of lawyers without much work, and that they will hang around the Labour Bureau waiting for these people. Just like, in America, there's ambulance chasers. They're finding people in the Labour Bureau halls who are unhappy with people, and in fact, I think it's really quite dishonest what these lawyers are doing, mm-hmm. because they will always tell the person that they can get a lot more money, out of the company than they could, if they didn't use their services. And I think, especially for some workers, because quite often workers will be living very close to the company, and they still have family and friends who are working in the company. Mm-hmm. And if you have a very bitter legal dispute with the company, and most likely it's not going to earn you so much more money than you first asked for, then the damage that they have done with their friends and relatives in the company may be so bad that they are basically forced to cut off relations or cut off their contacts with those people. And I think that this is just because the lawyer just wants to try and make some money. And I think that it's really not a good situation. But there are a lot of lawyers now in China, and they don't always have enough money to make. So they are trying to, I don't know if fool is the right word, but definitely they're trying to get people to make legal arbitration claims that in normal cases they probably wouldn't make. So I think that everybody needs to expect that they will have arbitration claims coming to them. If they do something against the labour law, then the chances of this happening are much greater. But even if they follow the labour law completely, it's still going to happen. And I think that the most important thing is that you always have your company lawyer who is able to take the case, immediately, that you don't wait until you get a labour arbitration case to look for a lawyer, that you have a lawyer lined up. Because if you have to, if you don't have a labour arbitration case in front of you, then you can talk to lawyers and find out who you think is good and get recommendations from people that you know on your own time without any stress, and then you find a lawyer that you think is good. But if you're running against the clock, because when you get the summons from the court, it will have a date, then you're running with a tight schedule, you need to find the lawyer, then everything becomes quite, extremely stressful. So I would recommend that everybody have a backup lawyer who is familiar with labour law, that they can just make a phone call and say, I've got a summons from the court, I need your help to represent me in court. Right.
So be prepared.
Yeah, I think for labour arbitrations, it's the figures are really increasing. The number of arbitrations brought, the number of complaints that are brought to arbitration court. So I would suggest that people really are prepared for the summons from the court.
Okay. Anything else?
I think the other thing is that when you're involved in a legal dispute in China, you really need to try to focus on your main core business. And that's why I say you should have your lawyer ready,
right,
and then you get them to work on that. And you should consider you should have a good HR department who is following, and your company should be following labour law. So you should consider it more as a learning thing rather than a big failure. And you should concentrate on just trying to run the company as best as you can and make as much money as you can for the company, rather than stopping all your other work and just focusing on the labour dispute, because that I think that cost to the company is much greater than any compensation that will be given to an employee.
Yeah, especially if you have several going at the same time.
Yeah, and I think it's very important that you have a good HR team or HR manager, and if that person is on top of that, your labour disputes will definitely be less. But like I said, it's becoming now more trendy. I don't know if that's the right word, but it's definitely becoming more common. We had some labour disputes 2 or 3 years ago, and the court officials were saying that they were extremely busy now with all the arbitration cases. So I think that's probably a fairly typical representation of how many arbitration cases are being held now in China. I think in general it's becoming a more common thing.
Right. Okay.
So the plan for the best, and what is it? Hope for the best, but plan for the worst.
Yeah, one of the most favorite sayings in Finland.
Okay.
Okay. So
all right.
Thanks for this. I'm sure next time we will have a more joyous topic to discuss about.
Maybe we can talk. Maybe we can talk about law cases next time. A bit more about that. All right.
Okay. Thanks a lot. Talk to you later.
See you later. Cheers.
Okay, bye.
Bye.